Sources tell Politico President Trump will not consider the House-passed bill on universal background checks as part of his proposed gun package. In the aftermath of the mass shootings in Dayton, Ohio, and El Paso, Texas, the president is expected to announce his proposal to curb gun violence as soon as next week.
Previously, the president said he would also support federal red flag laws, which can prevent some people from having guns. According to the Gun Violence Archive, there have been more mass shootings than days this year in the United States.
Michael Lawlor joins us now from New Haven, Connecticut. He is an associate professor of criminal justice at the University of New Haven, and he also authored Connecticut's 1999 red flag law, the first of its kind in this country. So this is a great test as to how successful these red flag laws can be, because it's the 20th anniversary now. So walk us through Connecticut's red flag law. What does it cover and how does it work?
So just to be clear, in 1999, I was a member of the legislature, chair of the Judiciary Committee, and we had a workplace shooting in our state where a disgruntled worker came in one day, walked down the hallway and shot his colleagues, and then killed himself in the parking lot. And in the aftermath of that, we tried to imagine, since everyone was saying they saw this coming, basically, they had reported to the police the warning signs, and the police accurately said at the time, he hasn't broken any laws, there's nothing we could have done to separate him from his gun. So in the aftermath of that, we began working with mental health professionals and gun rights advocates to come up with a balanced proposal that would give police the tool when they had the evidence and when a judge gave them authorization to seize the guns and refer a person for mental health evaluation. So that law has been on the books since 1999. And basically the way it works is that if someone reports to the police their concerns that someone has access to guns and poses an imminent danger to themselves or to others, the police are obligated to do an investigation. They bring a sworn affidavit about their investigation to a judge, and if a judge signs that affidavit, it becomes a warrant which allows them to seize the firearms, refer the person to a mental health evaluation, and then if the person chooses, they can ask for a hearing before a judge within 2 weeks, where the state, acting through the prosecutors, has to prove by clear and convincing evidence that they continue to be an imminent danger to themselves or to others.
So I'm curious, since enacting the law, Connecticut has seen lower numbers of gun-related incidents and deaths, or has it not had an impact at all?
Well, it's had a huge impact. This has been studied extensively by researchers at Yale, Duke, and the University of Connecticut School of Medicine. And they've determined that, especially when we're talking about suicides, that this law has clearly prevented scores of suicides over the 20 years it's been on the books. In addition to that, it's been used over 1,400 times successfully in our state. It's never been successfully challenged either on constitutional grounds or on police abuse grounds. These horror stories, these predictions that I hear people talking about in other states and in Washington, D.C., that somehow this is a denial of due process or a violation of the Constitution, are ridiculous. We've had 20 years of experience here, and it's clear if you read these affidavits, these scenarios that the police acted in response to are clearly demonstrate that someone was about to do something with those guns, either kill themselves or shoot a bunch of other people or both, right? And so we know it's been effective, and one of the frustrations I have is listening to the criticisms that are emerging around the country is like, if any of that was actually true, you would have evidence that it actually happened in Connecticut, and there's no such evidence.
So just out of curiosity, you said it's been used 1,400 times since it's been enacted. How often in those 1,400 times, how many times have police officers come out and determined that they were not going to take somebody's firearms away? Do you get what I'm saying? Like, how many times have people asked that these red flag laws be used, and officers have said, you know what, not here, not under these circumstances?
So we don't know how many times that someone reached out to the police and the police investigated and decided not to seek one of these warrants. It is worth noting, however, that in our law it says this warrant has to be the last resort. Sometimes when people reach out to the police, what they're conveying to the police is evidence that a crime has actually been committed, in which case the police have the traditional options of a regular search warrant or an arrest warrant to take action. So our law just allows one additional option if all else fails, where they've got the evidence that someone is in imminent danger. What we do know is that when these warrants have been obtained, they've never been successfully challenged. I mean, because this law is written very tight, and it is endorsed then and now by some of the most strident gun rights advocates in our state. One of my colleagues, my former colleagues in the legislature, Representative Art O'Neill, who's a very conservative Republican, actually wrote to the leader of the Speaker of every House and the President of every Senate around the country last year, saying, if you're looking for a model, here's one that's stood the test of time. It's fair, it's balanced, it's constitutional, and it's effective.
Now, I don't know if you're going to know this or not, but, since 1999, other states have passed their own versions of these red flag laws. But when I started reading about it, I thought about Florida and Nicholas Cruz. And we know that he posted these threats online. We know people called into the FBI, and absolutely nothing was done. What do you think is being done right in your state that isn't being done properly in other states where, at least in Florida, it didn't work?
Well, they didn't have a red flag then in Florida. They do now. But what I can tell you is in Connecticut, in the first few years after it was enacted, it was only used 5 or 10 times, maybe 20 per year. After the Virginia Tech shootings in 2007, the number of calls to the police and the number of these warrants being issued really jumped a lot. And then after the Sandy Hook shootings in our own state, there was far more. So now, in a typical year, there's almost 200 of these warrants issued. So what we know is that people are more inclined to call the police when they see the warning signs, and it's more likely that the police know exactly what the procedures are to obtain one of these warrants. And I think that explains why it's being used so relatively frequently in our state. And, it is worth noting, I think you pointed this out earlier, that Connecticut has one of the lowest firearm death rates in the entire country. And the red flag law is only one piece of a puzzle in our state. We have a very comprehensive system for obtaining and possessing firearms. Responsible law-abiding owners have every right to do so, but when you're not responsible or you're acting dangerous or you're a threat to yourself or to others, that's when your license to have the guns can be revoked, and under certain circumstances, the guns can actually be seized from you.
I think that's really interesting because you're talking about a cultural shift within your state where people have become more comfortable identifying things that they believe, is a threat. And here in New York, if you see something, say something, it's sort of plastered everywhere. I wonder how much it's really sort of influencing people, because I think people still feel uncomfortable, calling up law enforcement if something looks a little funny, because you don't want to ruffle feathers, you don't want it to be a false alarm. But clearly there's been a cultural shift in Connecticut.
Yeah, it's true, and it does take time. I mean, people have to get accustomed to the idea, citizens, that they can call, and they should call when they see certain things. And on the law enforcement side, the police have to know what their obligations are in terms of this investigation. They have to know the procedural steps to actually obtain a warrant. The judges have to be familiar with how this works. And as time goes by, this has just become a part of our criminal justice system here in Connecticut. And as I said, over 20 years, there's really no evidence that it's been abused. These visions of police kicking people's doors in because a neighbor called. I mean, actually, the most frequent type of person to reach out to the police with these concerns is either a family member or a healthcare provider. Many times, if you read these affidavits, it's the treating psychologist or psychiatrist who felt there was a concern, reached out to the police, and the police took it from there. But this does require, the procedural steps are exactly the same as obtaining a regular criminal search warrant or an arrest warrant. And that's where we know there's no constitutional violation.
Michael, real quick, and before we wrap up, we saw in Gilroy, California, in that shooting where 3 people were killed, that the gunman was able to obtain guns in Nevada and then bring them to California, where the shooting actually took place. So, how effective are these red flag laws if there aren't any restrictions at the federal level?
Well, if every state and or the federal government adopted laws like Connecticut has, there'd be a lot fewer people getting shot and killed in this country every year. That's for sure. We had a recent episode here in Connecticut. A young man in Norwalk actually was able to buy what's banned in our state, an AR-15, by driving to New Hampshire, buying that and a bunch of large capacity magazines, coming back to Connecticut. But he posted stuff online, which was conveyed to the police. And the police obtained one of these risk warrants, we call them risk warrants, and was able to get the guns. And he was actually arrested because they had, once they had the AR-15, they knew he had broken the law by bringing it into our state. So in an ideal world, you wouldn't be able to drive to New Hampshire from Connecticut and buy one of these weapons, but you can, and that's why one good thing would be if every state adopted the same laws Connecticut has, including, but if all else fails, at least a red flag law.
Really fascinating. Michael Lawlor, thank you so much for enlightening us. Really great interview.
Thanks for the opportunity.